July 26, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. My name is Chris Ramey and I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using as the state and community recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The format enables the city, what is the next word here? Okay. Oh, I see. The format enables the Planning Commission to meet here and hear from the community and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with public comment, followed by a work session on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format I need to take care of first. Thank you for your patience while I work my way through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the blue hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When the public comment begins, our meeting operator will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it's your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes, so your time to speak will be based on the number of people signed up to speak. As always, feel free to contact staff if there was testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. Before we get to our first agenda item, I would like to welcome our new member, Thomas Fiorelli. For those of us that were eager, we logged on early and saw Thomas take the oath of office. Well done, thank you. That was always fun to see that. And thank you for volunteering for the assignment. I know you've been in a series of meetings already, and we're eager for you to begin as an actual bona fide participant in the commission. I was wondering if, I know we don't have a lot of time today, but maybe Thomas, you could do a short introduction of yourself, and then we could just do maybe 2 sentences about our backgrounds and get you started that way.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. Again, my name is Thomas Fiorelli. I am a doctoral candidate at the University of Oregon, studying landscape architecture. I'm a trained planner, also with a master's in public administration. My interest here is really trying to make our community the best place it can be, and I'm excited to be working with everybody here. Thank you so much.
Well, fantastic and a great synopsis. I'll try to be equally precise with my introduction. I'm native Eugenian, born and raised, educated in Eugene, trained as an architect, practiced as a facilities planner for decades at the University of Oregon, where I was the university's architect and vice president for planning, design, construction, sustainability, and something else, real estate, I think. Currently, I'm serving as practicing as a consultant, providing services to institutes of higher education in the areas of space planning, facility planning, and master planning. So with that, I'm looking next at Commissioner Beeson.
Good morning and welcome, Thomas. Glad to meet you. I'm looking forward to working with you. Let's see, I have lived in Eugene most of my life. I worked pretty much most of my life, Eugene Water and Electric Board, and have some utility electric and water experience. Been on the Planning Commission for 2 years now. I was on the City Budget Committee, and I've been on a couple of other civic government committees along the way. And this is an experience here that I enjoy very much. Thanks, and I'll pass it to Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you, Commissioner Beeson. Welcome, Commissioner Fiorelli. I'm Tiffany Edwards. I have been in Eugene since 2012. I'm originally from Bend, and so I spend a lot of time over there. Was just there this past weekend. And I am my day job, I'm a government affairs professional. I'm currently working for Lane Transit District, so I do all of our government affairs and community relations, things like that. I've been on the Planning Commission now for 3 years, so and I learn so much from everybody, and I really appreciate all my colleagues, and it's a really good group. We're really thrilled to have you, and you're just gonna learn a ton, so be prepared.
Well, let's move to Commissioner Isaacson.
Hello, I've been in Eugene for the better part of 10 years, off and on. I went to college here in the early 2000s, moved to Chicago. I have a BA and an MPA. I own a small business here in Eugene, which keeps me very busy. It's where I'm coming live from now. I've been on the Planning Commission for about a little over a year. So pass it to Commissioner Taylor.
Good morning. Hi, welcome. I have been in Eugene since 1995, and I have an undergraduate degree in architecture, a graduate degree in planning from the U of O. I manage a private architecture and planning firm in Eugene, and I've been with TBG for about 25 years. I was also in the Peace Corps, segue between undergrad and graduate. And the relevance to that is that's where I really have a strong, like you, passion for kind of developing community and all the various aspects that that brings.
Well, that's great. I know we're missing Commissioner Fraglet today, and hopefully we can catch up with her at some point in the near future. I think you're going to enjoy your time on the commission. We're eager to get to know you better and perhaps even someday greet you in person. So we look forward to that day. I think you'll find us to be an interesting, engaging, and dedicated group. As you could see from the short introductions, like you, we share a passion for our community and making our community a better place. So again, welcome to the commission. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to move us, unless there's anything else. No. I'm going to move us on to public comment, which is item A in our agenda. Public comment is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topics except for items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. And do we have anyone with their hands up who wishes to speak?
We do not have any members of the public on today.
Well, so much for item A. So let's move on then to item B, a work session on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan. And Chelsea's here to lead us through this topic.
Hello, it's good to see you all. So I'm Chelsea Hartman. I'm a senior planner, and today we have Elena Domingo and Terry Harding, also from the city, on our team. Kate Purley's here. She's one of the co-chairs of the Community Advisory Committee for the Neighborhood Plan. And then we also have some folks from Cameron McCarthy who will be helping us with the code. So we have Colin, Grace, and Zach, it looks like, on with us today. And I can go ahead and share my screen and get started. Okay, hopefully you all can see the slides and not the notes. Yep, okay. Okay. So today I'll start with a brief project overview. We were last doing a bigger project overview with you all in March, so we'll touch on that a little bit again today. Also talk a little bit about the River Road Corridor Study, and then I'm going to pass it over to Colin to debrief our CAC conversations that we've been having and to lead us through the discussion of the key code questions. And finally, I'll wrap it up with a preview of next steps. So the neighborhood planning process has been a collaborative effort between the River Road and Santa Clara community organizations, Lane County staff, and City of Eugene staff, among other stakeholders throughout the two neighborhoods. The process officially kicked off in fall of 2017, and it really built on a lot of prior community and neighborhood planning efforts that were led by the community before that. This process will result in a neighborhood vision that will guide decision-making in River Road and Santa Clara for decades to come. Here are the project phases as a refresher. The earlier phases of the process focused on asking the community what they value in their neighborhoods now and about their hopes and visions for the future. This input informed the Community Advisory Committee, or the CAC, and the topic area working groups as they drafted the goals and policies to reflect the neighborhood vision and priorities. In 2019, the Eugene City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners approved the draft goals and policies as a platform for moving into the action planning phase. That phase focused on drafting, evaluating, and prioritizing the actions which have been identified by the community as possible strategies to implement the plan policies. This spring, we provided updates to the Eugene and Lane County Planning Commissions and received feedback on the land use code related actions to focus on in the adoption phase. The discussion at our March 22nd Eugene Planning Commission work session directly relates to a lot of the key code questions we'll be discussing today. Many of them focus on topics such as commercial and mixed use areas, economic feasibility, transitions between zones, and additional Willamette Greenway standards. Other important topics from the March discussion touched on the need to coordinate with the city's Middle Housing Code Amendments project to implement House Bill 2001, as well as the importance of supporting ongoing plan implementation and monitoring to see how we are working towards the desired outcomes outlined in the neighborhood plan. Plan implementation and monitoring will be supported by a neighborhood plan policy and the action plan, which calls for continued collaboration between the city, county, and community. In May 2021, the project team received direction from the council and board to move into the adoption phase and begin preparing the neighborhood plan adoption package for community review. An overview of this phase is provided in attachment A. So the neighborhood plan adoption package has several components. And the first and probably biggest, most important piece is the neighborhood plan itself, which articulates the community vision through the goals and policies. It will eventually be a formally adopted, legally binding land use plan. It will be supported by the non-regulatory action plan, which will help to guide implementation. The package will also include comprehensive plan and refinement plan amendments, zone changes, and land use code amendments that will help implement certain actions to support the community vision, such as encouraging active neighborhood centers and a variety of housing types. Depending on the extent and location, these changes may require city approval, county approval, or both. For plan designation and zone changes, those are all, the ones that are being considered right now are all within Eugene's urban growth boundary. And attachment C in your packet shows draft proposed zone changes that are being considered as part of the special area zone. This primarily focuses on a quarter mile around the River Road corridor up to the new Santa Clara transit station. And the proposed changes also include other commercially zoned areas throughout both neighborhoods and some key large church properties that could have potential future redevelopment opportunities. The second map in the packet also shows unincorporated areas in gray, since proposed changes in these areas will only occur and become effective as property owners choose to annex over time. At today's meeting, we'll be focusing on the key code questions in attachment B. This will inform the development of draft code concepts, which will come back for Community Advisory Committee, Planning Commission, and community feedback starting this September. Feedback on the draft code concepts will result in more detailed draft code amendments anticipated later this year. The project team will continue to provide updates and seek Planning Commission feedback on other adoption package components as they are developed and refined throughout the adoption phase. So in alignment with the Envision Eugene key corridor strategy, the River Road Corridor Study, which is a subset of the neighborhood plan, conducted an in-depth analysis of the River Road corridor from Northwest Expressway up to Hunsaker Lane, where the new Santa Clara transit station is. This work was funded by a grant from the Federal Transit Administration that was awarded to Lane Transit District and the City of Eugene. The corridor study resulted in draft land use concepts and multimodal recommendations that encourage mixed-use neighborhood centers in a variety of housing types to support implementation of the community vision along River Road. In December 2020, the project team wrapped up work with the corridor study consultant team and submitted deliverables to the FTA, with the acknowledgement that work would continue as part of the neighborhood planning process to refine the draft land use concepts. These concepts will be represented in a draft special area zone that we'll be talking about a little today. The project team will also continue coordinating to ensure consistency with House Bill 2001 and the city's middle housing code amendments work. So as I mentioned earlier, consultants with the firm Cameron McCarthy have joined the project team to further develop and refine the draft land use concepts. This will include some of the concepts that are listed here on the slide, as well as I think the main goal of these ones is to support mixed use corridor with active neighborhood centers, with the corridor mixed use area, higher density housing along the corridor, and allowing more middle housing options within a quarter-mile of River Road. It will also include transition and Willamette Greenway standards, among others, code standards. And at this point, I'm going to pass it to Colin to debrief the CAC conversations and walk us through the key code questions. And Colin, just let me know when to advance.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. I think you can just leave it on this slide while I go through the debrief and some of the themes we heard from the conversations. First of all, good morning, planning commissioners. I'm Colin MacArthur, principal planner with Cameron McCarthy. Like Kristen, I have been in Eugene now for over 25 years and have directed the planning practice at Cameron McCarthy now going on 16 years. And we are excited to have the opportunity to work with city staff on refinements to the draft special area zone for the River Road Santa Clara corridor. As part of getting engaged in the project, or getting engaged in the code development portion of the project, we asked Chelsea to set up small group check-ins with members of the CAC so that we could collect background information and discuss the various interests of the CAC members. These meetings occurred on July 7th and 8th, and there were 5 meetings with up to 2 or 3 members of the CAC each time. We talked about issues, concerns, desired outcomes related to implementing certain actions of the neighborhood plan and action plan itself through the code. And we talked about potential revisions or needed revisions, changes to the draft special area zone. These conversations mostly stayed high level at a policy or conceptual level and did not delve too deeply into technical code detail, but we will be starting to delve into some of that detail with the questions we posed for the CAC, and we'll be discussing with the Planning Commission here later in this meeting. We did think the conversations were productive in identifying themes, topics, and issues which need further refinement as part of this project, and issues that we're going to explore at a conceptual level, which will be the next phase of our work, developing concepts, code concepts to bring back to the CAC and the Planning Commission in early fall. These small group conversations revealed or identified a few themes related to the River Road Santa Clara corridor and the plan and code work. The first theme that we identified or that emerged was the theme about character. River Road Santa Clara is a river and garden district, farm and country character, assets such as open space, green spaces, an extensive Willamette Greenway, expansive tree canopy, urban farming, gardens, food production are all important values, and preventing increased density or redevelopment from negatively impacting or altering these assets is important or a critical endeavor in our work. The concept or theme of corridor itself, and recognizing that this planning effort is focused on a major transportation corridor linking two connected but spread out Eugene neighborhoods. The corridor has become a throughway over time, with few areas that feel like community or like neighborhood centers or community centers, and it has become less walkable over time. And within our planning work, there are opportunities to create centers and to reduce the divide and mend the fold that is the corridor. The theme of core areas or centers is in the plan and in the code, and that was reinforced through our conversations. A desire for businesses that serve the neighborhood and support businesses like coffee shops and dining, shopping to serve surrounding neighborhood areas. Desire to have or see more development types other than just multifamily, and to balance commercial land with residential use and make sure that the areas that have been identified as centers or cores aren't, or do have those supporting neighborhood uses and aren't developed as 100% residential. And to make sure that these neighborhood centers or core areas and the areas surrounding them are walkable, connect across the corridor into residential areas and to the greenway itself. Concept of transitions, or the need for transitions between redevelopment and higher density, was also reinforced, between R1 and infill, and between commercial and mixed use areas. And then related to that, the challenges of lack of space for transitions, especially abutting R1 zones, and the absence of cross-street support transitions and buffers, which is also compounded by some streets that are not fully developed to city standards or maybe in county jurisdiction. And then the need for perspectives, diagrams, and other means to illustrate how these transitions will work in concept form, so that they can be then used to inform code, which will be part of our next work task. Greenway itself is a theme. Again, it is a key transportation and recreation corridor, not only in River Road, but all through Eugene. There was concern about future development and redevelopment and preserving recreation opportunities and character, open space opportunities, and garden and farming qualities or activities that occur currently in the Greenway. And then an interest in more specific zone requirements that do allow for redevelopment in the Greenway, but provide more protection to properties within the Greenway, and also allow for improved or expanded access to the river. And then finally, a collection of themes related to the code and views of the code when it was presented to CAC, some feelings that there was a disconnect between the vision and goals in the plan and the intended outcomes in the code, feeling that there may have been a disconnect between the economic analysis that was done to support the corridor study and the neighborhood plan, and over-regulating development form and economic consequences of that. An interest in simplifying the code and better visualizing development outcomes, and a need to focus desired outcomes and strategies in the code, or incentives, or focus on incentives to achieve those outcomes. to encourage thoughtful development that minimizes negative impacts, to encourage innovative development, to preserve public spaces, access to public spaces, green spaces, tree canopy, and open space, and to consider workplace changes, such as home occupation, the need for outdoor spaces for restaurants and businesses, and to anticipate other changes that may come with our rapidly changing economy. And finally, to use the tools that we have at our disposal to attempt to influence development projects from being unremarkable and or not feasible to remarkable and feasible in the River Road Santa Clara corridor over the next 20 years, or however long the horizon is for the plan and this code being in place. Those were our themes, emerging themes from the conversation. I can move into questions now, the key code questions, but did want to pause and see if Chelsea, Terry, Elena, or Kate, I know Kate's on, if they had anything they wanted to add before we start talking about code and key code questions. Any questions from the commissioners?
So Colin, I maybe a process. Oh, I see Commissioner Taylor got her hand up too.
Yep.
I had one or two things that are not related to the 976 items that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Sort of overall, and maybe this is a question for Chelsea as well, and the leadership of the team. So the action items, there are many of them, and you maybe have thought this through, but some of them we will be addressing and some we will not be addressing. And I was wondering if there was a way to sort of track those over time with a matrix, so people who have been working on this action plan forever can see, oh yeah, there's action plan number 2, and I can see, oh, that's future work. Action plan number 3, there's the code that addresses that idea. Is there any way we can sort of shorthand that so people can see how we're making progress on the action plans?
Yes, so that is our intent with the action plan right now. It kind of breaks the actions into big project types. So one of them is land use code amendments and zone changes. And for those that we are hoping to address with the special area zone, we've tried to identify that. And some of them are more long-term or citywide things, like clear and objective standards for the Willamette Greenway is one of the big ones. There are also projects that would be implemented by different city or county programs or projects like transportation and parks projects. And then the last category are more community partnerships. So there are things that could be led by different nonprofits or the community organizations, or really any kind of stakeholder. And that is our hope as part of plan implementation, that we can meet annually, check in, see how we're making progress, and then kind of adjust as needed.
So the list that was in our packet, were those the land use? Was that the land use category?
Those are specifically land use code actions that could be implemented as part of the special area zone. So a very small subset, and then their action plans quite large. I think we talked about it in March, and it was a little overwhelming. So we tried to just zero in on the things we're focusing on with this project.
That subset that was in the packet, that seems more or less within the capabilities of the Planning Commission. That's something we could do something with. So that's what is there some way to track those? It says this item is now found in this part of the code, so that people can sort of see what happened to the idea and where it ended up as code language.
Definitely. I think that's a big part of what we would like to do with this work. Yep.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I just want, because we have people that are listening, can you just, either staff or Colin, can you just verbally describe the difference between the two maps? So as part of our packet, there's 2 maps. They both have current and proposed, just what that variation is. Just if you can explain that, that would be helpful. That's it.
So I can touch on that. So the 2 maps, they both show the draft proposed zone changes as part of the special area zone. And a lot of zoning we're not changing. Like, we're not changing the broad R1 zoned areas throughout the neighborhoods. We're not changing a lot of the public land zoned areas. So a lot of it's staying the same. And the big difference between the two maps is the second one shows the overlay of areas that are outside the city limits right now. And those will not get zone changes right away. They will only get the new zone and code as a property owner chooses to annex. So that's been really important to communicate over time. Like, we are planning for the long term for this entire area, but a lot of the zone and code won't go into effect immediately for the unincorporated properties.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. The other thing I wanted to mention that I met with, and it was both Commissioner Isaacson and I were invited to meet with John Belcher and Cameron on their committees. So Commissioner Isaacson wasn't available. I met, it was definitely a high level discussion. There are notes generated from that. And then I know there was also another subcommittee where Commissioner Isaacson and I, as the liaison, I couldn't attend, and Commissioner Isaacson went, and that was last week. So I just wanted to let you all know that the committee, our committees have been involved.
And thanks for that reminder, Commissioner Taylor. That was something we talked about on March 21, was the sort of subcommittee idea. And I think that you and Commissioner Isaacson are our link back. And so we're counting on you. Thank you. Okay, I think we're good to go. Back to you, Colin.
Okay, we're going to jump into the questions now. And Chelsea, if I could get you to pull that slide back up. It does have the questions on there. Okay. Okay, so the approach I'd like to use, and then again, at a high level, these questions are intended to inform the next phase of our project, which is work in the conceptual level, developing concepts for how these aspects of the code may be applied, and then vetting those concepts with the CAC and the Planning Commission in early fall. So we tried to pose questions around some key topics that we thought would lead or require concept development. So I think the approach I'm going to take is to read the context for the question and the purpose of the question. And then within each question, there are, of course, a few sub-questions. So I'll read those sub-questions. I'm going to give you a few of our takeaways from virtually the same conversation we had with the CAC last week. And then some takeaways from that. And I'm going to give Chelsea, Terry, Elena, and Kate an opportunity to chime in with any of their takeaways from that conversation while the commissioners are thinking about any input they want to provide on these questions or any follow-up questions they may have. So that's kind of a long lead-in, but there will be some time to think and process these questions. And I guess if you're not at a point where you're ready to provide input on the questions in this setting, you can provide input after this by sending information to Chelsea or myself or anybody else on the consultant team. So with that, the first question is really about use schedule and permitted or prohibited uses. And our most recent experience working with the city on code is the SDR Downtown Riverfront Special Area Zone. And we drafted that working with Raul Broca Architects, and then did one set of modifications to that code for the most recent vision put forth by the developer a couple of years ago. And in that code, we used a flexible or more adaptable use schedule. What's current when I say draft SAZ, that's the code that was prepared by prior consultants working on the project. What is in the current draft code is a very traditional list of uses, similar to what you would see in our any other base zones, residential, commercial, industrial, and that is an extensive list of categories and uses, along with whether or not they're permitted outright, subject to special requirements, or prohibited. Downtown Riverfront and some other special area zones include categories and example uses, but they're not as prescriptive. And we prefer this approach because it provides more flexibility and adaptability to accommodate unforeseen new uses. And I think we've seen quite a few new uses emerge over the last few years, and I expect we'll see more in response to technology, changes in technology and changes to the economy. So the questions we're posing are, is there support for exploring this more flexible use approach and being less prescriptive? And are there specific uses that we should consider for prohibition or not allowed in River Road, Santa Clara? And some takeaways from our conversation with CAC was that, yeah, there was general support for looking at this flexible approach as long as there were good examples of the uses that we'd like to see that can be used to evaluate future uses, and then a clear interpretation process. And then some of the uses that we could potentially consider for as prohibited are like the auto-centric uses, some talk about self-storage units and whether or not more of those should be allowed. And then telecom switch stations was another use that was brought up. That's essentially a dead area or dead use and unmanned, or a facility that's only maintained periodically. So those are the few examples that were thrown out as potential prohibitions. But overall, I think there was general support for moving forward with this concept, at least at the conceptual stage. So Chelsea, Terry, Elena, Kate, is there anything you want to add before we give the commissioners time to comment? Oh, John, you're on. Good too. I didn't see you there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for including me. I'm sorry I was late. We were on vacation this weekend and evidently it ran over my mind. So I apologize for jumping in late. My big concern is clear and objective standards. I'll give you an example. Right now, we do have a land use application submitted for developing the last open space on the River Road, Willamette Greenway, and their response to the criteria for the Willamette Greenway permit is, we can ignore that. We're not even going to respond because it's not clear and objective. Be that as it may, my concern is I don't want us to adopt any code that has the risk of being treated that same way. So I like the idea. Certainly, we don't need to worry about whether or not we have video rental stores these days, and other things will change too. But I think we do have to look through that lens of making sure that whatever we approve is enforceable. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement that clear and objective applies to development standards and criteria of approval, those regulatory things, and that those do need to be very clear and objective, especially when they pertain to residential and middle housing. I think we can be a little more flexible and adaptable when it comes to uses and how we regulate uses, and sort of separate that from the clear and objective development approval path that would apply to projects. So Chelsea, I can only see a few windows. So I'm gonna let you do the hand calling.
And I actually can't see anyone since I'm sharing my screen. So
Okay.
I just texted Elena and asked if any ECAC or if she sees anything.
I think I can do it. Let's go. Let's go, Commissioner Taylor. You're at the top of my list. Let's go to you.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of respond similar to John Belcher, just because I've participated in the subcommittee. So I guess while I hear the flexibility, I'm also hearing the members of the neighborhood committees kind of express. John said it clearly. I don't need to repeat it. So I guess when I was reviewing this over the weekend, I guess that was my big question: is what is the neighborhood's objective of this flexibility? What are they trying to achieve? And because I'm hearing a little bit of Colin, your interpretation of flexibility, yet what I'm hearing from the neighbors is definitely wanting to encourage development, yet wanting some clear and objectivity. So I just wanted to say that. I know that, so I guess my question for staff is because this list, honestly, in providing planning services and kind of outcome, there isn't as clear a path. If there are uses, it does provide flexibility. There is going to be interpretation. So in order to kind of respond to neighbors' concerns of taking this approach versus the more what you're calling a traditional approach, is a few questions. One, in areas in the city of Eugene where you already have flexible use lists, what is the process to determine if it's not on the list? What's the process to determine if that's allowed? So currently in the traditional use list, there is a process with which there's a clarification, and the applicant's going to provide documentation for staff to make an interpretation. And so that's already in existence. So to some degree, the traditional list still has an element of flexibility to actually accommodate what you've described, Colin, which is if there are uses that aren't here today, that don't exist, or it's not listed, there is a process. So in the flexible list, is there a process, and how is that determined? Or is it subjectively determined by staff? Therein lies kind of John Belcher's comment. So that's one. How is that currently dealt with in other areas? And is that meeting the objective of what the neighborhood associations are communicating? So that's one question, is just interpretation. How's it done? And I guess what I'd be asking, because I really don't feel like I can answer the question of what specific uses should be prohibited. I mean, that's really going to be something that I think staff's working with in terms of what are the overall goals and policies within the adopted plans. So being consistent with kind of the greater at-large community, and then what is that vision, and what are those policies in the refinement plan, obviously in Envision Eugene, that are going to get at those prohibited uses. So I guess I don't feel really like I can contribute to that. So there.
As far as how the flexible use lists are implemented now, I would see if Alyssa or Terry have any thoughts about that. And we are really trying to get at the bigger outcomes that are already in the neighborhood plan goals and policies, as we're thinking about wanting, like, what does an active neighborhood center look like? So places to eat, places to gather, I think are big things. The neighborhood plan also speaks to some prohibited uses. So storage units have been a big issue. There are a lot that exist out here, and those aren't gathering places for the community. So thinking of things around that with the use list, and I'll just see if Alyssa or Terry have anything to add about the flexible use lists that exist in the code already.
Well, Alyssa, jump in if this is not right, but my understanding is the process would be the same between the way our base zones regulate uses that need to be interpreted versus a special area zone that has categories of uses. And there is a process for that. I saw Alyssa give one nod, but I believe it's a planning director level decision.
Yeah, there's a process called a zone verification that we use if there happens to be a use that we're unclear about. I will say this is also so that, as Colin mentioned, it's in the downtown riverfront zone, but also the Willamette Station special area zone uses this flexibility model, both for housing and for, the other commercial type uses that are allowed in there. And that's been
Walnut Station.
What did I say?
Willamette.
Willamette. Dang it. No, I did not mean Willamette. I meant Walnut Station. I have it in my head. Yeah, looking at Walnut Station was a W.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Terry. Let's go to Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you. Appreciate the information. I think I agree with most of what's been said. I guess a couple of comments I want to, maybe in no particular order. I have, I guess, kind of a suggestion as we go forward, not necessarily today, but as we go forward over the next several meetings. I found myself in the last couple of days as I went through this material, I was wanting to know what the CAC thought and what the neighbors thought, and I'm kind of hearing that a bit from others. I think when I looked at this, I mean, I'm ready to give you some input, but I found myself thinking what would have been good for me was to hear from the people who've been working on what their answers were to these questions, particularly some of the uses to prohibit and so on. So that's just, and that kind of, for me, flowed through every question. I was sort of wanting to know sort of what they were thinking. The other thing is, I guess just as another general comment, in the March material, it talked about the standards for the special area zone to be developed, is the way I was reading it. And I think that's accurate. And all through this material, it sounds like the standards for the special area zone exist. So I'm hoping I'm not embarrassing myself a little bit and that they've been sent out and I completely missed them, but I couldn't really, I guess I would like to see those. And so I was kind of going through all of this and sort of reacting to what you wrote in the memo, which is fine, but I would like, I guess, to see the standards as those are forthcoming. Given that, again, I kind of agree with some of the comments on the clear and objective side. I would prefer, given all of that, I would prefer the flexible approach. That made sense to me. I went back and looked at the riverfront material, and I think, it would be helpful to, I looked at that standard in detail, all of the stuff that's permitted and all of the stuff that's prohibited. And I think that some sort of a starting platform kind of list from you guys back to us that we could kind of react to would help develop that. I mean, it's quite a potentially long list on things that might be prohibited. So I guess so. My general answer, I definitely prefer the flexible approach. I'm all the way through this. I think I'm looking for adaptability. As you guys talk about, the flexibility, allowance for diversity of the diversity of options for both housing and business, the multi-use along this corridor, the enhancement of the neighborhoods, the promotion of walkable neighborhoods, and so on. So that's kind of my input at this point. Thanks.
And I can jump in a little bit. So for the CAC feedback, I think since we're not at a big decision-making point, we just had these meetings close together and just are really at this information gathering stage. But when we do come back with the draft code concepts this fall, there will be that gap between the CAC and Planning Commission meetings. So we will be able to provide that feedback and what we heard from the CAC meeting, because I do feel like that'll be really helpful since they've been in the nitty-gritty details of the neighborhood plan for several years now. And I can't remember what my other point was. I'll come back to that if I think of it.
Okay, going off hands, I think Commissioner Edwards, you're next.
Thanks, Colin. I'll be brief. I think I generally, much like my colleagues who've spoken previously, I think my support would be for flexible approach. I would be concerned over what the economic consequences of over-regulating. And I have a lot of questions as to how you actually do that. So similar to John Belcher, I mean, even just something that's enforceable. I also shared the same question to I think that Commissioner Taylor had said, that what exactly is the vision of the neighborhood, the individuals who are participating, and just kind of thinking about activating the areas and whatnot, and trying to think about, okay, we want coffee shops, not car dealerships and things like that. And so I get that. But I guess, like I said, over regulating, I would worry that, because obviously these are privately owned, most of them would be privately owned parcels. And it's really, I mean, I would want to understand, if I was investing in an area, what I, really can and can't do. And so I think the flexible approach and being careful not to overregulate for the economic impacts. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Ramey.
Well, thank you, Colin. I'll try to be brief as well. So sort of echoing Commissioner Taylor, for me, I really want to hear what the overall goals and vision are of the community, and specifically about kind of what their employment idea is, if there is one. Are there going to be large employers in the area? It doesn't look like there are. And I think some of that, I don't see in, manufacturing, industrial zoning. So that, I think, leads us then to some idea about, well, what kinds of uses are appropriate. And I just like to know what, kind of where they're going on that. And I think flexible is fine. I think there's a clear and objective issue that John Belcher has already raised. And for the staff, that's an appealable decision, isn't it? The director's interpretation of the code can be appealed. So there's some danger to that in terms of time. And then finally, oh no, I guess that's all of them. So I was brief. I didn't even know how brief I was. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Let's go to Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, I'm also in agreement of everything I'm hearing here. I think that we can't overregulate this, especially given how much the neighborhood is changing. And how much, I will say we're getting a lot of feedback from the neighborhood, which is really nice, but I mean, this is going to be a very long-lasting plan that we can't just simply look at the here and now. We have to look at where it's going to be tomorrow and in 5 years, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So the more flexible that we can be, I think the better position we will be in later on, and it'll be more with the soul of the neighborhood as it changes as well.
And we'll go back to Commissioner Taylor.
Great. I wanted to thank Chelsea, thank you, Terry and Alyssa, for that explanation. And there was a reason why I asked it, is sometimes when we look at flexibility, if that list isn't thorough enough, meaning really portraying that flexibility, you're going to end up in the same process. So it kind of goes to what John Belcher said. You're going to go back into a code interpretation that is appealable. So just being careful, if the objective is to have flexibility, make sure it's there and that you're not actually inadvertently kind of creating an element that actually really wants to move forward smoothly, that now you have an appealable item that potentially could be an issue. So I'm in Walnut Mixed Use Station. I mean, I'm there. I helped actually on the neighborhood side develop it. I think it does definitely work. It's just something to make sure and pay attention to as this evolves and is developed. I also really want to, which you'll hear in some of my other comments below, is to kind of repeat what Commissioner Edwards said and Commissioner Isaacson, is that and I hear this from the neighbors, that aspirational kind of audacious goal of where you want the community or where we want the community, and I'll say I want it to, might not happen in the initial years. It's kind of like Glenwood. We've seen kind of aspirational goals of Glenwood that it stays undeveloped. There's nothing there for years. We don't want that either. So wanting nice, cute little coffee shops and blah, blah, blah might evolve over time. There's a lot of residences there. So I think the evolution will occur. I also think landing on the end goal first isn't necessarily going to happen, and allowing enough flexibility for that evolution of the market and market demand. I think as long as the important pieces of what kind of gearing it towards what we want it to look like, and then paying attention to definitely those, we don't want auto oriented, right? In these critical, we don't want a giant car dealership. So kind of making sure those are there to kind of have those bookends, but then allow some evolution. So I definitely agree. Flexibility, I would definitely say this area, I would want and encourage flexibility to basically ignite that development and have that evolution occur, as long as the main goals can be maintained. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner Taylor. Commissioner Fiorelli, I saw a physical hand go up.
That's correct. Thank you, Colin. I just want to mention, I'm not sure if it's a me problem, but I can't see the hand raise option on Zoom. I'm pretty well versed with the software, so maybe I'm logged in a different capacity today or something, but thank you for acknowledging the physical hand. I want to echo what a lot of the commissioners have already said, that I think flexibility is extremely important. I think it's important to allow for the market to speak. We have developers who understand a great deal about what could be successful in these areas, people who are willing to invest money. And I think it's important that we make it possible for them to bring those ideas forward into fruition. And if they're successful, if the neighborhood wants those things, they will be appreciated and more will actually appear in the future. At the same time, I also don't want to see something that just allows a new approach carte blanche because somebody thinks it's different than before and might be a good idea, then create some sort of problems for the community in the long run. So I'd like to see a balanced approach. I'd really like to see flexibility, maybe with some examples that are provided for developers and people who are interested in doing different types of maybe experiential retail or other things that are out of the box and creative, making it possible for this area to evolve organically and in a controlled manner, so the city has some sense of what's happening in the future and what the residents are going to want. And I also do think that not everybody, of course, is going to have the same preferences within the community. And so allowing developers to bring something forward, even when there is a margin of opposition, is something that I'd like to see possible as well in this area.
Okay, thank you. Okay, in the interest of time, given that we've got 5 more questions that we're going to try to get through, I'm gonna move to the next one, and this one is a little more technical, a little more specific, and does start to delve into the themes of flexibility and regulating uses that we were talking about in our current discussion. I think the commissioners can provide input at a high level, but because you haven't seen the standards, you may not be able to respond to some of the questions we have about specific uses. But I'll do my best to try to set it up and explain it. So when we reviewed the draft special area zone, it has 2 primary zones or sub areas along the corridor mixed use zone and a corridor residential zone. And the corridor mixed use zone applies to centers along the corridor. Those are the red areas. And then the residential zone is the orange areas. And so we observed that the mixed use zone does not specifically require any commercial uses. So conceivably it could be developed as 100% residential if that's what were to happen, if that's what the market supported. And then we observed that the list of uses permitted in the mixed use corridor residential zone was relatively narrow. For example, it did not permit sales and services uses or manufacturing and production uses, some of that employment that Commissioner Ramey was just talking about. And although it explored requiring commercial at key intersections, the nodes, it did not specifically require it. Again, this could be developed as 100% residential. So I'm going to ask these questions sort of in a different order. The first question we asked was, is this concept of centers along the corridor, centers of nodes with residential in between, is this generally supported? Second part would be, do we need to go further and require commercial uses at these key intersections so they don't all end up being entirely residential? And then should we be more expansive in our list of uses and what we're allowing in mixed use residential if those uses, again, support neighborhood activities? And what we heard from CAC, or some of our takeaways from our conversation last week, were, yes, there is this support for the string of pearls concept where centers along key intersections along the corridor. Let's relook at that to make sure these are in the right places. But yes, we do support this center or node idea. There is concern about allowing or enabling existing commercial uses that are established in the corridor to be converted to all residential, if that's what the market or development were to support. So preserving what is the residential, or excuse me, preserving what is the commercial uses out there, or at least the ability for them to redevelop as more intensive commercial uses. And then there's support for exploring the requirement that we require some commercial or active uses as part of a building or part of a development, as part of the developments that occur in these centers. So again, questions are, is this center corridor concept supported, requiring commercial, should we not? And then do we want to expand and allow more neighborhood scale uses in the residential zone? Terry, Chelsea, Kate, John, Elena, is there anything you would like to add before we take commissioner comment?
I'll just talk about this map really quickly, and a comment that I was going to say earlier and I forgot, but Elena reminded me. So there are a lot of references in the memo to this draft special area zone, which the Planning Commission has not seen. We did get to a level with the corridor city consultants that they had a draft. It wasn't complete, and neither staff or the CAC were comfortable or supportive of most of the recommendations in there. So we kind of paused that work, and we're taking this opportunity to kind of reset and rethink, do we want to move forward with some of the recommendations that were developed as part of the corridor study, or do some of them need to shift to better align and support the neighborhood plan vision? So that's a big takeaway. So we have a draft, we haven't shared it because it needs a lot of work and will likely change a great deal. And then this map is an older map that identified some possible areas that would be near potential MX future locations for stops that could be good opportunities for more of those active commercial uses. And I'll stop there.
Let's go to John. You've got your hand up. Let's go to you first.
There, thank you. Yeah, this was the biggest challenge of the code we had received from the previous consultant. One of the strong selling points we made for this plan is that we would try to move the neighborhood to be more of a 20-minute neighborhood. And if the way the previous corridor mixed use code was written, you could take what is currently commercial and convert it to 100% residential with some minor shadow platting in the first floor. To me, that was a double whammy. Number one, it takes away the little bit of commercial we has and adds residential at the same time, which generates more demand for what you have less of. So we are very concerned, at least I am, that indeed that we do not decrease the opportunities for commercial and perhaps increase the possibility. So I guess I'm agreeing with Colin, but it was a fatal flaw for me in the previous proposed code. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that expansion. Let's go to, I'm not sure who was first. Let's go to Commissioner Ramey.
Okay, well, just for the record, not first, but
okay.
So this is an ongoing dilemma, and it's neighborhood commercial, I think, is the example of this, where you're required to have commercial in the ground floor of a building, and it's built that way, and it's an empty shell for a decade because the market isn't going to fill that space. So the question is, but the converse of that is a downtown high-rise for us, for Eugene, which we all know of, the Capitol project down there that has no commercial on the ground floor. So that's the opposite. So I don't know where we end on that, but my question is, was there any marketing research done, any economic research that would tell us what percentage of the corridor could support this kind of commercial? And is there any way we can align what we're doing with that data? So no answers, only questions. Thanks.
No, I think that's helpful. So the corridor study did do economic analysis. It wasn't that fine-grained, but the general takeaway that was that there's not a lot of demand for additional commercial development at this time. They did say as more density increases over time, new commercial services could be supported, but there is a lot of existing commercially zoned areas already in this area. Although they're not, a lot of gathering spaces, restaurants, there's still that gap in the community, but there isn't the strong market demand to support more commercial at this time.
And so I forgot to mention, I'm all in on the node, the string of pearls, that concept. Absolutely. I hope we can hang on to that. And then finally, I would say this is sort of the in-between requirement where you can make the ground floor 14 feet or whatever that magic number is. So sometime in the future, it's easier to convert to commercial. And I know sometimes land use codes are written that way. So that's what I have.
Okay, Commissioner Beeson, apologize if I omitted you for being first.
No, it's all good. Okay, I agree with Commissioner Ramey. I gave you most of my caveats on the first question, so I won't. I'm just, I guess, in response to the questions here, as I thought about it, I'm not sure I'm going to be in the order that you had. The support for requiring commercial uses only at key intersections, I was struck by the word only, and I couldn't get past that. I kind of like that idea, and it makes some sense. But I guess what I would do, I like the idea of being able to have the option or opportunity for multifamily development at some of those, if the development possibilities and is right. So maybe some multi-story, multi-unit facilities with the ground floor being retail. That's kind of long-term development, but all of that for me continues to build that concept that along the corridors, you're promoting this idea of having the amenities close by the adjacent neighborhoods, and people can access these things, and you're promoting the walkability. The question too, I'm on board with the string of the neighborhood centers along the corridor, the residential use in between. That's definitely a yes. And your C question, retail services, the daycare centers, or let's just say the variety of uses and so on. So it kind of just follows with what I think I've been trying to say as a general theme. So my answer there would be yes also.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards.
Colin, I kind of have a big question about just exactly what, I think we've touched on this. What is the demand? And I guess I would ask some of the folks that professionally do this. I know Kristen Taylor and a number of people that work with clients all the time. And it's sort of like, what is the market demand for the type of development that we're actually talking about fostering in this area? Because as I think about this, and I think about the other pieces that we're kind of planning in concert, such as the transportation piece and the potential build out of MX through that corridor, that actually changes the dynamic considerably. If you don't have the same type of amenities and commercial activity that actually brings people there, I mean, yes, you need people living there. That's very important. But you have to have the places for them to be going to. And so that is a big piece of why that corridor is so ripe for another bus rapid transit line. So, I mean, and just thinking about that, and then thinking about how investments are, developers are drawn to making investments in areas where they know that those investments will be lucrative. So, I think it's all just kind of tied together, and I have a hard time just, trying to come up with the answer on the fly. But I think that I share the concern that John Belcher has, that if you just suddenly convert some, commercial spaces and they're all residential, I do like the idea of maybe somehow incentivizing the commercial development or the mixed use that would incorporate actual retail and other type of amenities, so that we don't end up with just a lot more density of housing. We need both together, and I believe they really foster one another as well. I think that people want those amenities in their neighborhood if that's where they're going to be living. So sorry if I'm not more clear. I think there's still some unanswered questions for me as to what does the market what's the demand right now, or where do we think the demand is going to go based on the other things that are planned for this corridor?
Commissioner Taylor.
Thanks. I think actually Commissioner Edwards said it well, is, it is going, honestly, going to be market driven. So look at really more high profile corridors, like Glenwood's a really good example. There was a very aspirational refinement plan there, and it's not built, right? So there's proposals there to do things that are quite different than what was anticipated on properties, if you followed that recently. So I think to some degree, Commissioner, I think there's evolution, right? I mean, look what's happening at, Willamette is a really good example, right? So there's evolution. It has a lot of potential, yet it still isn't quite there in terms of what maybe some of the aspirations have been by varying groups. Franklin, my neighborhood, Walnut Mixed Use Center, same thing, right? So there is an evolution. When there's a lot of residential, there will be more of a demand for commercial. It will come. What comes first? Honestly, depending on some of the objectives, because obviously if all residents come first, the ability to kind of move commercial in, it will happen. Will it happen as fast as maybe the vision or desires of neighbors? Maybe not. Maybe it's going to still be more car centric. So it depends on where the city of Eugene sits. So Glenwood's a great example. Springfield, the jurisdiction ended up making the public, so jurisdiction, put improvements in to help kind of inspire development there. So I think if there is incentivizing is really going to be a critical component of this, because and to answer your direct question, Colin, I like the idea of pearls. I like the idea of what Kate and John want for the community, which is walkable. You have services that support the neighborhood. You don't have to get out of your car to have those services. It is right next to the river. It's a phenomenal location in the city of Eugene. So I think incentivizing some of this is going to be really important. Otherwise, quite frankly, I'm not sure it's going to evolve even in the next 20 years to hit the vision of what they want.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Commissioner Fiorelli and then Mary and Kate.
Thank you, Colin. I'd like to say that in general, I like the idea of having the nodal sort of pearl concept where you have lots of commercial and experiential retail and other sorts of places surrounding residential. The concern that I have is, and again, this was echoed by a number of commissioners previously, is that we really don't know enough information quite yet, for at least personally for me, to be able to say with confidence what we should be looking for in terms of this question. And part of that is, are we going to have the bus rapid transit across the River Road corridor? And if that is the case, then the nodal concept of having pearls along the way, that makes a lot more sense. And then developers will be essentially signposting to them that they can reduce the parking requirements down to the minimum required by code if we know that there's going to be alternative transportation available. If that ends up not being the case and it's not chosen for the moving ahead project, that's going to change the calculus considerably. And the market is going to speak not necessarily through what the demand is going to be, but through what the developers are going to feel is appropriate and feasible for them. And then, of course, we have to think about space. So having a bus rapid transit along that corridor, to me, is the most important feature that we could have information on before we start even getting into this conversation. And so if we do see that happen, absolutely. I think the Pearl concept is a great idea. If we don't see that come to fruition, I think what we'll see is a much longer term evolution from a car-centric environment to something that is more walkable. And if went the other direction, we'd probably see it happen faster with the bus rapid transit. I'd really like to see what happens in the coming months as we learn a little bit more about the BRT.
Thank you. Let's go Mary and then Kate and John.
Hi, I'm on the CAC, and this is more of a comment than anything else. Everything I'm hearing today is something that we were always worried about on the committee, and that is that the neighborhood plan is really becoming a corridor plan. Because what everyone's been discussing is what's happening on the corridor in detail. The corridor is not the neighborhood. It's not even the biggest part of the neighborhood. And so there are issues that neighbors here are concerned about that have nothing to do with the corridor. And I'm a little concerned that the only thing that's going to change in the plan, or the only thing the plan is really going to work with, is what's happening on the corridor itself. That's not a neighborhood plan. So that's just.
Okay. Thank you. Kate and then John.
Hi, just to direct comments specifically to the question that we're working on right now, is that the economic analysis we got from Eco Northwest through Sarah Architecture was what we would get is residential development. And if we are committed to the idea of creating walkable neighborhoods and our string of pearls idea, then the thinking that we need to allow whatever the market will support at the moment and then hope for the kind of redevelopment we want is, I think, a little bit Pollyanna-ish. And if we know we're going to get some kind of transit improvements, if we know we're going to get transit-oriented development along our corridor, then we need to create a situation where if we're going to only get residential built first, we have to have residential in a form that is most easily converted to the kind of neighborhood commercial we need out there desperately to create the long-term vision of a sustainable neighborhood that we have. And so allowing it to become a corridor of quarter-mile deep multifamily housing with no real path toward creating the kind of redevelopment to create the mixed use corridor we need and want is, I think, short-sighted at best and kind of cuts off our nose to spite our own face. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Kate. John.
Thanks for a second bite at the apple, and I'll make it quick. This is what you guys are doing, are basically helping define the stick of the carrot and stick. And I think we do need a significant discussion with the city council about what kind of incentives they will provide to help steer the market in a direction away from where it would go naturally. My other concern is that, and I'm sure I've got the term wrong, but I'll call it opportunity cost. Once you develop a property today, chances are that property is going to stay that way for 20 to 30 years just because it's a new development. You're much more likely to redevelop something that is old and ready for redevelopment. So if we do have a significant increase of converting commercial to residential, it'll be a long time before that has a chance of coming back to commercial. So I guess the big thing I'm talking about is we also need a discussion with council about how to incentivize the market in the direction we want to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor.
I think that actually the CSC members are really savvy. So essentially what we're talking about is, at least I'm hearing from them, is they want flexibility, yet want some clear parameters so that what John's talking about doesn't happen, which I think is a realistic kind of goal in currently. I mean, it's throughout the city of Eugene. We have plenty of corridors that follow the commercial standards that, you know, even if the bottom floor is vacant, trying to, at least it's reserved for commercial. So I think those are the things that really need to be worked out, is where's that flexibility and what are we working with? And I think some of the critical questions have come up. I think John's questions are great. The MX corridor, that's a really great question, something to understand. There's also some interesting things. I mean, look at Crescent Village. There was the anticipation of MX going there. It didn't go there. They put in a lot of commercial. They put in mixed use. The residential stood there. That commercial took a while to kind of land. There's still commercial built. There's still tenant spaces there that are vacant. So it's really, we're just talking about what does that want to look like? And I think putting too much into the plan, too much vision, like the refinement plan of Glenwood, is not going to serve this neighborhood. Whereas more of a traditional approach might actually serve the neighborhood well. And where are you going to balance those two things? And where's the option for incentivizing? So I also wanted to talk Mary's comment. Really good one in terms of the bigger neighborhood. So I'm in one of those neighborhoods, actually, you know, Franklin Corridor, you got Walnut Mixed Use Station. I live in it. So remember, and this is something to think about, remember C1 as a zone, neighborhood commercial is a floating zone. It can happen where there's the demand. Is there some option or opportunity where you want to actually look at, if there's a giant area, a sea of residential, do you want to allocate little commercial zone areas? I don't know. Is it already there? Like, for instance, the Amazon area. There's existing small scale C1 that's not zoned C1. It looks and feels like it. The designation's different underneath it. And it has become C1. Maybe you already have those in your neighborhood. Maybe you look at those and securing them as a C1 zone. Maybe it's a commercial designation. So I do think looking deeper into the neighborhood, because of the concern of relying intensely on the corridor to provide the walkability, might not be the only way to look at this.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Taylor. There were some threads in those comments and in prior comments that will lead us to our next question, which is about balancing economic feasibility with regulating form, and essentially how far should we or should this code go in regulating built form? And I'll say that of our current SAZs, downtown Riverfront, Walnut Station, even the Whitaker, regulate form to different extents. Most space zones or most codes will regulate height and setbacks. Other special area zones regulate massing, facade articulation, windows, placement of buildings on the site. And then there were some mentions of the Glenwood Code refinement plan and the refinement plan, which does include a lot of those regulatory elements in addition to others. So our questions for CAC and the Planning Commission are, how far beyond what's currently regulated at the base zone do we go to regulate form, and then really what are the desired outcomes? And what we heard from CAC members was that there was support for shaping street side activities, the placement of buildings, preventing things like parking between the building and the street, incentivizing or encouraging open space and good design of pedestrian areas. And it was really more about, or less about, regulating form or built form, and more about ensuring that the built form does not impact values like solar access and tree canopy coverage and open space. And then we had a lot of discussion about transitions, which are our next question. And we'll get into more specifics about that. But this question to PC is, beyond setbacks and height, how far should this code go to regulate built form? And I already see a couple hands. And
I just want to do a quick time check. So we have like 30 minutes left, and including this question, we have 4 questions to get through.
So let's go top to Commissioner Taylor.
Okay, so I'm just curious, this is more of a question maybe for Kate, John. Have you guys as your group looked at Walnut Mixed Use Station? Because actually just being involved in this, a lot of your concerns were the same as the Fairmount Neighborhood Association. And it is a tried and true. I mean, there's enough development. I think talking to staff, calling staff, what has that felt like as development's been proposed? Is it working? It actually has enough flexibility, yet there are parameters. It seems like, at least I'll speak from a neighborhood standpoint, it seems like it's working. Generally, it's working, meaning there aren't a bunch of appeals. You're not seeing that happen. So that's kind of an indicator, right? Okay, so it's consistent with that objective of that overlay. So I'm just curious. I don't have a direct answer to this because I guess it's all in the code. I think it's reasonable for neighbors to have these concerns. I think every single special area zone has similar concerns, and that's where you see it come into play. Would I like wearing a planning commissioner at-large hat? Do I want to see, and I also actually administer and support projects, do I want to see micro refinement plans throughout the city of Eugene that are completely different? That gets really complicated. It gets very arduous, difficult for staff to manage, difficult at the same time, kind of embracing character. Yes, that's important. So once again, balancing these things. So I'm just curious to know what the CAC's done in terms of look at like Walnut Mixed Use Station. I think it would be helpful if they have it in detail.
Thank you. Commissioner Ramey.
Well, to me, these are two different items, excuse me, 2 different issues. One is about the pedestrian experience. If we're going to make a walkable neighborhood, what does that look like? And that's the issue about where the front door is, what the setback, what the step back, solar access, how close you walk down the sidewalk, are there cars between you and the street? And I think the Walnut node, again, to sort of pile on that one, I think there are some examples there about what that means and how that could work, but it can't be over prescriptive. But I think giving some guide and really asserting what that is. We're interested in creating a good environment for the pedestrian. So if you do that, then every other standard, if you think, start from that point of view, then every other standard, I think, follows. So secondarily then is your next point, which is really the transitions between different uses and different intensities of uses. And for those, I would look at the work we did at Clear and Objective and see if there's anything there, because we already did that. And so maybe that's a starting point, or it gives us something to bounce these ideas off of. So two different things. One is, what does the pedestrian environment look like? How can we create a good quality pedestrian environment? And then secondarily, what are these transitions between different intensities of uses? And I think we have some examples in Clear and Objective.
Thank you. Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you. In terms of your question 3, I guess to try to be brief, I don't support design regulations to any greater extent than we already cover under the code. I think some people have kind of spoken to that. I think that just sort of raises some potential issues. I also think more generally, we really are, what this is about for me in all of this stuff across the entire neighborhood and across the entire city is our effort to try to remove some barriers and to promote flexibility and to give the opportunity for developers and people who live out there to develop diverse business and residential uses, inside the UGB, and use everything more efficiently. So all of that strung together for me, I just generally think the idea of having more design standards rather than less is probably not good. On the residential side, it strikes me that the same answer, but we're probably also limited, I assume, to the design standards we're already coming up with for the middle housing amendments. We're continuing to move forward. So that's what I do with A. I think B is probably, in terms of outcomes and priorities and all of that, I'm again just wanting to be really cautious with any restrictions, stay consistent with the code, looking for the kinds of neighborhoods I've been describing in my other answers. You talk about solar access, tree preservation, et cetera, and all of those things I think are very important. I guess it's just, for me, it would be to stay consistent with that and not do anything more restrictive than what we already have for code for the city.
Thank you. John.
Thank you again. This is a challenging area, and we'll talk more about it when we get to transition standards. In hindsight, I'm not sure we thought about this, but this is a zone that is basically one lot deep all the way down the corridor. And that creates some unique challenges. I took a quick look at some of the lot depths for some of the proposed change zones, either commercial mixed use or residential, and they're 90 feet deep. So I don't know how you're going to be able to meet standards of transition zones, adaptive parking standards, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be a real challenge. And I look forward to see what the planning staff and the consultant can come up with. But, one thing is what is desirable for the community, but there's also what's desirable to the neighborhood. And I certainly followed what happened in South Willamette when I was on the Planning Commission. And it's got to have some degree of acceptability to the neighborhood. And the real issue in this particular neighborhood is going to be transition standards and parking, which is another issue that I think there's a solution, but we haven't managed to see it implemented yet. So I get it, but just let's not end up where we did with South Willamette. There has to be some acknowledgement of how this zone will fit into the neighborhood. The other real challenge is we have almost no parallel streets to River Road to serve as a natural buffer between more intensive and less intensive uses. So that adds to the complexity as well. So I don't have any answers. I just see challenges, and we need to be creative and find the sweet spot in between what's absolutely desirable for the community and what can be accepted by the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Commissioner Isaacson and Commissioner Taylor, and then I'd like to move to the next question for time purposes. Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, and I don't, this isn't directly on topic, but it's similar. As we're adding density and more parking and more businesses coming in and out of River Road, I'm hoping that we're having conversations within city about Vision Zero, because the existing infrastructure is kind of at its peak for being able to ensure that we're keeping the safety of the folks who are going to be crossing River Road to get access to stores and other commercial areas. That is already having problems. We've had a fatality on New Year's Day where John has been working very hard to get funding through the city on an emergency basis to get a crosswalk at Hatton. But as we are going, as he mentioned, 90 feet deep and adding more businesses, there's going to be this increased demand on the existing loads. So I'm hoping that between added changes to the lighting, which we're already in the process of doing, adding in more traffic crosswalks, as well as maybe looking at the speed limit itself, is something that we need to have a conversation with, because I would like to remind us that when the eco apartments were put in place, it was this kind of soft agreement that the developer would fund a crosswalk at that intersection, provided that there was funding at the end of the project. Of course, there wasn't funding at the end of the project and it wasn't built, and the end result was a fatality. So as we begin to look at these projects and make it enticing to business to come in, there needs to be a kind of a stick and carrot, a give and take between what the needs of the community to keep them safe, our overall vision for the city, and our need to spur economic growth.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for reminding me and the group just of the existing pattern. This isn't a grid. In fact, there are elements, parts of it that is, but then some of it's quite suburban with dead ends and circuitous routes, which is actually great, but it's not going to distribute. It's not going to disseminate and distribute traffic evenly. So there's some interesting things that I just spent some time for a week along El Camino in California. You've got Mountain View, all those series of communities, and El Camino is essentially, Highway 99. So it's interesting. There's a couple things. I do think that's an important thing to address. So I think, John, stay in that, because, incentivizing, if that's going to go to council, what about some parking structure? What does it look like to kind of co-locate, which we talked about as a planning commission for Walnut Mixed Use Station, Willamette Special Area Study, is that because of that impact and because of the existing development patterns, would it make sense to look at some structures potentially? I mean, that's interesting. Is it viable? I don't know. The other is Walnut Mixed Use Station does have blocks. So if you look at that really large commercial kind of pearl, maybe blocks can be creative. Blocks were created in Walnut Mixed Use Station. So maybe looking at those development patterns and looking at what does that look like to incentivize, or what does that look like to actually impose some of those things for that are more structural, that are more that public infrastructure portion, which is essentially what Springfield did with Glenwood. So John, it's great. I think we should, that definitely needs some attention. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Taylor. I'm going to try to get through transition and Greenway in the time that we have left, and I do not think that we'll be able to get to the last question due to time. So it's parking. So transition, And what we've heard is this is likely going to be the #1 priority that we focus on in conceptual development, trying to figure out how all of this works in an environment that is not a grid with various lot sizes and applying new zones along a corridor. And this is more about the tools, and the tools that were proposed in the current draft special area zone included things like landscape buffers, interior lot line setbacks, height transitions, slope transitions, and requirements where abutting above grade open space can be located. And so the questions we posed are these standards sufficient, excessive, or insufficient? And if insufficient, then what else, or what other tools should we be using? And to pick up on something Commissioner Ramey said earlier, is that we should look to clear and objective and perhaps some of the work that was done in South Willamette as the floor or a baseline for these standards. So, and then the general takeaway I think from the CAC is that these standards are sufficient if they are achievable and can be implemented across the River Road Santa Clara area. So I am seeing a couple hands already pop up, and I didn't track who was first. So I'm going to go to Commissioner Edwards because we haven't heard from you in a little while. So you're first.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I would be supportive of the transition standards as we discussed them when we were going through the clear and objective process, specific to between the zones. So when you're going from, you know, single family home to what could be 12 stories tall, I would support that. I think that anything more that creates more buffering between, you know, just properties in general, I don't know that I would be supportive of that, because it actually does impact the ability to you know, the density and all that other stuff. So definitely supportive between those more intense zones and then the residential zones. We know that middle housing is going to be sprinkled in that as well over time, and we know that those changes are coming. But you know, I definitely think that I see that there is a need for just some buffering, some space, whether it be the landscaping or the, you know, the stepping up of heights and things like that. So I'd be really supportive of that in general.
Thank you. Commissioner Beeson.
Thanks. In terms of transition standards, I think my thinking on it has been evolving and changing quite a bit, certainly since I've been on this body, and certainly over the last 6 or 8 months. I also think this group, I don't know how the mechanism for it, but it would be good to have more detailed discussions about transition standards. I've thought of them as I've learned about them, that I think a lot of the origin for it would be to buffer or to help provide separation between the low density single unit dwelling zoning and more dense commercial or residential. And I think as we do middle housing implementation, that's going away. Now, it isn't going to go away tomorrow, and you'll still have the single unit dwellings sitting there. And I'm, I guess, sympathetic to that, but I find myself, I think buffering, I think all of these things we talk about take up space. And so I find myself thinking we should kind of limit, to the extent we can, the transition standards. And that's the way we should talk about it and kind of go forward. And we should look at those things pretty carefully and be careful how we recommend to the council that those things are instituted. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor.
I'll just echo what Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Beeson said. So I'd probably be inclined. I like the clear and objective to give parameters in terms of non-residential uses and residential uses. I think we went through a very long process for that had high public involvement. It's more consistent and equitable throughout the city of Eugene. And equity's been a big discussion segueing into House Bill 2001. So in terms of buffering and transitioning between residential uses, I'm going to probably land where Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Beeson are, and you're going to see evolution as we go through the House Bill 2001 process.
Okay, I see no other hands, so I'm going to move to the next question, which is about Willamette Greenway standards. And our code does have a Willamette Greenway permit approval process, which I know that Commissioners Taylor and Ramey are familiar with, and a set of standards that does apply to development that occurs within the Greenway. Those standards are somewhat subjective and may not be as clear and objective as we want them to be or need them to be, but you've heard that the CAC and the members of the River Road, Santa Clara community organizations place a high value on the Greenway and the functions that it provides and the transportation corridor and the recreational values. And the draft code does contain standards that apply to development in the Greenway, including regulating things like building massing, additional landscaping requirements, maybe even locational requirements. It applies them as a overlay zone, and there may be simpler ways to apply the standards, which we can explore through code development. But the general questions are, is there support for keeping these standards in the code, in the special area zone, and applying them to this segment of River Road Santa Clara through the SAZ? And should we consider any other standards that would apply to development in the Greenway? And I think what we heard from CAC was, yes, there's support for keeping these in, but recognition that we may need a citywide solution or a whole cloth solution that we can then apply to clear and objectively to the rest of the Greenway, and also to recognize that one of the functions in River Road Santa Clara is that it is a key transportation corridor and recreation corridor, and then maybe we should focus more development on the Greenway itself, the frontage on Greenway, rather than having developments have their back to the Greenway with parking in between the development and the Greenway. So back to the commissioners, is there support for more clean objective standards, and should we consider anything else? So let's go, Commissioner Ramey.
Well, the proof is in the details for sure. So I have a series of questions about the drawing. Is that green line the Greenway boundary?
No, so the Greenway boundary, we can provide a map of that. It goes all the way out to the River Road corridor in a lot of areas in South River Road. This would be an additional overlay. So the Greenway boundary would still exist and still apply. And our hope is to have additional standards that apply with this overlay to really get about how that development along the river and the path interact together.
So there were two different words used. One was within the Greenway and one was in fronting the Greenway, which are interesting but different concepts. And now the answer has just confused me a little bit more, and that's okay. I confuse easily. So because my next question would be, well, how many properties are we talking about? How many developable properties are there within the Greenway boundary? What are they? And what does the effect of this approach have to those properties? Certainly having worked with the Greenway permit process quite a bit in the past, it is both subjective, but it's only like 5 standards you have to meet. So it's not very intense, but I'm not sure it meets anybody's needs, depending on who's describing what the needs are for the Greenway. So I don't know that this is at all helpful, except clearly, again, I have more questions for you. So again, from the top, where is the Greenway boundary? How many properties are already within the Greenway boundary itself? How does that compare to the overlay boundary, and how many properties are affected by the overlay boundary? And then are we talking about confronting the boundary, or are we talking about the stuff that's inside, and which are we talking about? Sorry. And then finally, yes, making the Greenway criteria more clear, more objective, all good. Just be sure that we're not stepping on the state's toes. We can't do anything that is less restrictive than the state, I would presume. So we have to be at least as restrictive as they are. And that then, I think, leaves us subject to all kinds of appeals and challenges about what we've done. So, wow. So obviously, when I got to number 5 here, I had a lot of questions.
I can begin to respond to a few of those questions. And so we have an established Greenway boundary, and my understanding of the SAZ was that they took a portion of the properties that were within that Greenway, and the intent was to apply this special area zone to those properties within the Greenway boundary. I don't know the exact number, but it was a portion of the Greenway. And Chelsea, you can correct me if I'm mistaken. And what I've heard from CAC members is that there's not a lot of developable properties in the Greenway that are left to be developed. So this is mostly a standard that's going to apply to redevelopment. And I guess when I speak in terms of frontage, I'm thinking more about frontage to the corridor itself and not necessarily like the boundary or the setback. So properties that front on parkland or front on other areas that have access to the corridor. But this whole concept of how we apply it and where we apply it to needs further refinement, but it will be within the boundary, and it could be the entire boundary. It could be a subset of the boundary. So,
but it could also be. I mean, the one that's most interesting to me is that set of properties that confront the boundary itself, which is, I'm not sure where that is, but that one seems interesting to me as well. So,
okay, let's go, Commissioner Taylor.
So I do think this is a citywide challenge, quite frankly. I don't think that this neighborhood is extra special in terms of the river. I think the river has the potential for all properties that face it. I mean, there's the other side of the river also. I think what's special about it is that, I think, John, I can't remember, maybe you said it, Colin, is that there is so much existing development right adjacent to it, right? So there's going to be redevelopment, but there are other. So I do think addressing you said it, Colin, addressing kind of the Willamette Greenway permit process boundary more comprehensively is going to be important from a city perspective. I also think the river is the amenity, right? So if we compromise it too much, then the amenity and the beauty of it is actually compromised. So I think it's really important. Obviously, we're meeting the goals, the state and federal regulations, but I want to see it as an amenity, not like Chicago that turns it back on the river and now is trying to unravel that, right? That's the most extreme example. So I want the river to be a vibrant ecological corridor. So how do we do that and balance development? And I think that's consistent with at least my understanding. And John, Kate, Mary, you can correct me if I'm wrong. That seems consistent with the neighborhood. So I think I would support an overlay because I think it makes sense. I also would like to see some consistency. So I'd love to have this overlay maybe be used throughout the city of Eugene. I would love to not have like 10 different overlays along the river. I think it's missing the point. There is one common element here, the river. So let's be consistent with it in terms of it being the priority in terms of an ecological corridor. And then what does development as a whole jurisdiction, what do we want development to look like next to the river? and then there's a review process because maybe there's variations depending on where you are on the river, but a land use application or that overlay can address some of those nuances. So I guess that's at least my initial thought, and this is complex.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards.
Thanks. I'll be super brief. I really like the idea, and this is kind of a question for the neighborhood and the process that they've been going through. But one of the things that I really noticed when I came to Eugene was there was, the river was very isolated, in my opinion, from a lot of the neighborhoods and things like that. And I know we have the bank paths, but I think that there is a way to have very thoughtful development that helps to really kind of bring the river in. I mean, I know we're doing that downtown with the E-Web Riverfront redevelopment. So I would love to see some thoughtful parameters set around redevelopment opportunities that really help to bring the river closer to life in the neighborhoods and things like that. Because I actually do think that it creates a vibrancy that I haven't seen a lot of in Eugene. And I think that you can absolutely have very compatible development that can be along the river without compromising its integrity and its natural beauty and all of those other things. So those are my thoughts on that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Belcher.
This is the most challenging issue we're facing. The neighborhood really wants to maintain the way that the neighborhood relates to the river. Some realities. The last undeveloped property adjacent to the West Bank Park is under application now, and that's the one where they said, forget the Willamette Greenway. We're not even going to talk about it because it doesn't matter. So there's that. So the entirety, more or less, of all of River Road will have been developed. So we're talking about redevelopment potential, and across the highway, the belt line, Santa Clara's in just the opposite situation. They are all farmland other than gravel up against the river. It's even outside the urban growth boundary, so we need to work with the county on that issue. But they have a potential that we don't have in River Road because it's all greenfield. That someone mentioned protection of natural resources. We discovered in an appeal of a application by the city that the only natural resource issues that have any protection at all in the current code are water quality. We had concerns about impacts of lighting the bike path to the insect life and therefore the fish life, and we were told, sorry, we can't consider that. So that's an issue. The challenge there is we may have to go to the legislature to get any opportunity to change that. The other issue is, yes, the Willamette Greenway needs work across the city. That's a city issue. Our hope is we can get some kind of agreement from the city council as they made for the university area and for the Bethel area, that we will be a priority item for future work plan dealing with the Willamette Greenway, because it is, again, one of the other strong concerns for the neighborhood. So we have, and I hear the desire to make the neighborhood closer to the river, but you got to remember the West Bank Park is in between, and in many cases there is no ability to put anything adjacent to the river because of the West Bank Park. I'm not complaining about that, but that's the reality. And therefore, some of what I think you want to have happen can't happen. So I'll quit there. Thank you.
Thank you. Chelsea, I think we're at time.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask Commissioner Raby, or if anyone has thoughts about, we have one last question to get through about parking. It's a pretty open-ended, high-level question because it's another big issue. We haven't really figured out how any solutions for yet. So if folks have time to stay on a few extra minutes to get through it, or yeah, what the thoughts are with that one.
So commissioners, show of hands to do 15 more minutes. Can we do that? No, Tiffany's like, no. Okay.
I'm so sorry. I have a 1:30 meeting. I
Yeah.
apologize, you guys.
So have we broken the strands of trust if we go along without you, Commissioner? Are we okay? Okay. All right. So
That'd be fine.
thank you, Commissioner Edwards, for your understanding and all your good help today. We'll catch you up.
Have fun. All right.
Oh, we will.
Okay. Again, as Chelsea mentioned, this is a broad topic, high level topic, can be a divergent topic. And we are trying to figure out how we should approach it in the code, development of the code from a regulatory standpoint, and have asked a very broad question about what are the desired outcomes for vehicle parking that we should work toward in the code. And what we heard, some of the takeaways from the CAC last week were some support for the concept of eliminating minimum requirements, but concern about the effectiveness of that due to lack of capacity in the neighborhood to absorb parking if it's not required, and lack of available surface lots, and then lack of parking on substandard streets. We heard about some interest in looking at incentives to reduce parking through shared parking or other concepts such as municipal lots or structures, or the block parking concept that Springfield may be trying to apply in Glenwood. And then we heard an interest in something that we support is looking at examples or precedents from other communities, although other communities may have codes that are very different than ours, and very different than Eugene's code, different than the Oregon land use system, but everybody is across country, region, state is dealing with parking issues and parking standards and what not to require, or what to require and what not to require. So we were hoping to get some input from PC on what standards or regulations they would like to see us explore or not explore. And I'm seeing a couple hands already, and I think Commissioner Beeson, you were first.
Yeah, the very complex issue, clearly, and we've engaged it quite a bit in the middle housing discussion, as we all know. So my brief input would be, my thinking has moved on this and evolved. I would like to see us limit minimum parking requirements as much as reasonably possible. That's a lot to unpack there, and I know that would take a lot of discussion. I understand the tension between minimizing parking and what do you do with people who drive into the area who have a car. But I think, across the nation, the state, and across the city, there is more and more of a need to address this issue and deal with it. And we know that development is more expensive when we're providing places for everyone to park their car. So I would limit it as much as possible. Also pointing out maybe the obvious, we're already, in terms of this corridor, as we talk about it as a transit corridor for residential, our recommendation at this point on middle housing is to have no minimum parking requirement. So there's that. Anyway, that's my input.
Thank you. Let's go to Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, I'm right along with Commissioner Beeson. I think that in especially high transit corridors, the emphasis should be on encouraging folks to use mass transit and limit the amount of cars that are being parked in some of these facilities, especially as we increase density and go up. I mean, there really isn't going to be a likely scenario where every unit is going to be able to park a designated parking spot at their residence. Now that does create overflow, as is the parking at Echo, where it spills out into neighboring streets. So there has to be a balance there. But as far as I'm concerned, just like Commissioner Beeson said, as we get closer to the plans we've already developed, it should be cohesive with that. And to dovetail to what I was previously saying before, which is the more we encourage public transit, the less vehicle traffic means the less potential for pedestrian vehicle traffic, and the closer we get to Vision Zero.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor.
So I know Colin's going to expect what I say, but parking, it's always the most complicated, I have to say. Parking and traffic, right? I mean, a lot of development comes down to parking and traffic. So I think this is a big question, quite frankly, for the CAC. Just where I'd like to see all of our communities go are having allowing no parking. Yet we cannot avoid that Americans love their cars. So to go counter to culture, it has obvious consequences. Now, as a cyclist and someone that takes public transportation, I'm fine with it. Living in a neighborhood that actually it feels tremendous impact. So John, Kate, I'm willing to talk to you with my neighborhood hat. The university neighborhood, there's huge impact to the neighborhood, huge impact. It becomes a parking lot, honestly. So granted, they're large scale, huge event venues that are showing up. There's a whole bunch of regulations that make it livable. And that was part of some of specific land use applications like Matthew Knight Arena. So there's other things. So I think this is a big discussion that needs serious contemplation about the consequences and make sure that neighbors understand what they're asking for, quite frankly. So while I support it, sure. I just think that I think it has to be an understanding by the neighborhood about what the consequences are if we do something different than the current code. I love that our code allows 100% to be compact. I love that we have a reduction allowance of 25% and you can go over. I think we do a pretty well balanced code considering this area is not super urban. So yeah, so there's my thoughts.
Thank you. Commissioner Fiorelli.
Thank you, Colin. I want to say that I think Commissioner Taylor and Commissioner Isaacson really hit the nail right on the head when you're talking about the makeup of the transportation and how bus rapid transit or other opportunities are going to be available. What alternatives are there? I think a lot of it comes down to that. And then also, in the planning world, we often say it all comes down to parking. And whether we like it or not, being a person who's multimodal and primarily on foot or on bike, I personally see no issue with going down to zero parking, but then I need to put on my economics thinking hat and recognize that one of the levers that we have when encouraging developers to provide low-income housing is the parking reduction opportunities that are there. Removing that lever, to me, by going to no parking minimums at all, I think that could be a mistake, especially with what we're starting to see with House Bill 2001 and some of the speculation and some of the things that could happen economically with supply and demand. If we see moving ahead come forward and we see alternatives to driving come into this area, then I think removing parking minimums could be a conversation that we could have realistically. But I'm not personally in favor of going to that level of extreme quite yet. Do I think we're going to go there nationally or even at the state level and within our community within the next decade or two? Probably. But I do think that we need to be really cognizant about our older citizens and folks who like the environment that they have now and not putting certain people in uncomfortable situations when they don't have the parking that's available to them, and they're starting to see the neighborhood change in significant ways. So I think my thought here is in terms of desired outcomes. Please look at what's going to happen with bus rapid transit first, and then think about what's going to happen to the people who are there now and what kind of pushback that will create.
Thank you. Commissioner Ramey.
Well, thank you, Colin. So I'm looking back at the map for the whole area and reminded of what Mary mentioned a while ago. In this instance, we're talking about reducing parking, I think, only in the corridor area, or maybe I should just say, for me, that would be the only thing that would make sense. And even within that, it's probably a subset of some distance from what we think are going to be transit nodes. So it's in the context of the whole study, it's not that big of an area, but the implications of that are immense. And I think Commissioner Taylor described the existing code. You can even get another reduction if you have a transportation demand management program. So that puts it back on the developer to say, well, you know, we bought bus passes for everybody, or we whatever. Well, however they can figure out that they've reduced the demand of parking for their development. In terms of incentives, you know, I'm back to, well, maybe there's some way to incentivize those that are near the transit stops. And back to my old favorite topic of maybe if some of the units were small enough size that they were actually meeting that sweet spot in our middle housing goals, there'd be some incentives. We could use parking as a way to incentivize that. So it's sort of a perverse way of getting one thing by using something else. So yes, for me, as it's related to transit, recognizing that transit to the scale we hope is not there yet. And so there may have to be some trigger mechanism that allows us to come in after the transit's in place. And then finally, the basic infrastructure in the neighborhood is not there either. Some of the streets are not built out to standards, which I think reduces their ability to take whatever on-street parking we would expect in a different, fully developed neighborhood. So there's several places where we might put in triggers before these reductions can happen.
Thank you. Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, just one other thought. I don't know if the city has started to look at, but you know, we're talking about this kind of chicken or the egg thing where we're trying to figure out how to fit more people in a given area with the realities. They're going to bring their cars, and we can try to incentivize behavioral changes to go to rapid transit, and that's great. But to a certain degree, the reality is going to come no matter what we do. And so I'm wondering if we looked at shared parking facilities or park and walks as part of the neighborhood plan and the code enforcement, so that we're allowing, you know, a 1 acre spot or a ½ acre spot that's allowed for overflow parking for a neighborhood. So if you can't park directly on your street, I can park 6 blocks away and know that I can stop in there. As an overflow. I know that it's contrary to the whole notion of trying to get people to reduce as much as possible, but there is a little bit of you know, give and take and taking from both measures here.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor.
Super quick. I think probably John's aware of this, but making sure the CAC understand what the current code is. If there's 2 or more tenants, they get another 25% reduction, so 50% reduction. When you do an adjustment to parking, you can take that additional 50% off the 50%. So it's really, there's quite a bit, but then once again, like Commissioner Ramey said, the burden is on then the applicant. So it's pretty flexible, but once again, I think I don't want to restate anything else. I think this has been a great discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think that was the last slide, and I won't share the presentation again, but I will just say we will be using this feedback from both the CAC and Planning Commission and developing some draft concepts and bringing that back for CAC, Planning Commission, and broad community outreach starting in September. So we'll be back with a lot more detail. And I see, John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, excuse me. I meant to speak to that last issue. The good news and bad news is we have a case study to work off of, and that's Echo Apartments. When Echo Apartments, 192 unit R2 building, Only one in River Road that size along the road, along River Road was constructed. They went to the minimum standards for a transit-oriented corridor, and then they charged for 50% of those parking spaces. So what's happened is that we have a significant issue of people trying to park in the neighborhood where there is no parking because they're developed to county standards. People are parking immediately next to stop signs. We even had a case of an individual having someone parking in their driveway. So you may recall back in 2019, they came to the city, the county and the city agreed that the adjacent streets would be annexed so there could be some sort of a parking program put in place. Sounds like a perfect solution, allows the city to maintain their minimum standards and deal with the issue. There has been zero progress on implementing that program since, which is extremely frustrating. And it's my opinion that this is going to be another deal breaker if we don't demonstrate success on that site before the plan comes up for approval. So any effort that you can make to convince city staff that they need to get on this issue and show that it can work, the better chance we have of approving this plan. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good last point about there's the code part we're focusing on, and then there's incentives and parking programs and other things like that that will be needed to help support a lot of these concepts. And that's all I have. Thanks for running over meeting time.
Yes, you're very welcome. Melissa, is there anything vitally important that we need to share?
No, just we will see you on Tuesday, August 3rd at 5:30 for a continuation of your middle housing conversations.
Wow. Yeah, we'll be here before we know it. So excited. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your week. Stay cool. See you soon. Bye.